what is your expectation for what the game plan is going to look like from a Jeff Stoutland perspective in terms of handling Dexter Lawrence?
Yeah, the last couple of years when they've gone up against the Giants, and that was a Wink Martindale defense, they did a lot of gap scheme runs. So that was a lot of guards pulling, tackles pulling from the backside, double teams at the point of attack, namely on Dexter Lawrence, right? Try and get four hands on him on every single play. I would expect that they'll probably lean into that here in this one, but it is a little bit of a different defensive look with Shane Bowen now as the defensive coordinator. So it remains to be seen exactly what they'll try and do from that standpoint against Cleveland. They tried a lot of outside runs early. We saw some of those toss plays, some of those stretch plays to Saquon Barkley to try and stay away from the teeth of that Cleveland defense. It was kind of hit and miss of whether or not those were able to hit. And as we talked about the other day, they did not have a ton of success working downhill in that football game against the Cleveland Browns. And the guards just did not play well enough. They weren't able to get the front side blocks on the nose tackle, Dalvin Tomlinson. They couldn't cut off the backside defensive tackle and Shelby Harris more often than not. And so the guards will have to play better in this game going up against Dexter Lawrence and Raheem Nunez-Roches and the other guys they've got on that interior. I think when you look at the Eagles, their best version of that offense is going to be featuring that downhill run game. But if that's not there, it's going to make things hard, especially with the way they're getting after the quarterback.
It's also, I mean, for all of the advantages of having an athletic center like Cam Jurgens, this is the kind of matchup that you worry about head-to-head, right?
No doubt. And that's why I think that you would probably lean more into some of those gap scheme runs and try and see if you can get extra bodies at the point of attack. 2 sets of hands on Dexter Lawrence at all times. He's getting doubled at the highest rate in football right now. It's like 63% or 66%, something like that. So I would expect that to continue in this game.
Is it Dexter Lawrence or is it Lawrence Dexter?
It is Dexter Lawrence.
Okay. And it's Davis Jordan?
Davis Jordan. No, I believe it's Jordan Davis.
Got it.
Yeah,
okay.
I'll double check that.
Now, obviously, the Eagles in this game will be without Jordan Mailata on the outside. We expect it to be Fred Johnson. Interestingly, yesterday watching I'm always watching who's lining up where with the backup offensive lineman. Yes. And then I was expecting to see Driscoll back at center. Well, wasn't back at center.
Okay.
Gates was at center. Driscoll was spending time at right tackle. And I'm like, well, who's the backup left tackle? I mean, they didn't show it. So
really?
I think they're kind of keeping it private, maybe. I mean, it's like Lake and Vakalahi. It's not going to be him on game.
What's your guess?
It could be Steen. It could be Driscoll. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be Becton.
No, my guess would be Steen, right?
My guess would be Steen.
Yeah.
But it also could be Darian Kennard.
It could be. Right in the Kennards.
If Driscoll's at right tackle, then maybe Kennard would have been at left tackle later in practice. It's possible. It might be Mr. Kennard.
I do wonder at some point if they start to mix in Steen and get him more looks at guard over Becton. Not in game, but like in practice, try and get, because he's done well in game. So
that they changed the locker room.
Right.
We talked about that. Yes. Becton took the locker that was Steen's locker, the right guard, the starting right guard locker. Yeah. I mean, talk about adding insult to injury.
Yeah. I think that it's been a little bit up and down for Becton, but also Landon Dickerson hasn't played particularly well yet either. He's had his moments to his level that we've come to expect. He hasn't been bad, but he hasn't been all that good either at this point. So I don't know if it's an injury or something there with Dickerson, but they will need better play from the guards here in this game.
So with it being Fred Johnson and with the Giants unfortunately having lost Kayvon Thibodeau.
Yes.
How's Brian Burns looking? What do we expect on the edge?
Burns is looking good. I know there was concern early because the first week or two, they just didn't get any pressure on the quarterback. And obviously that has flipped going the other way as they are pressuring the quarterback and hitting the quarterback at a higher rate than anybody. They lead the league in sacks right now. And Burns is a big part of that. Thibodeau was playing very, very well before his injury. That's a big loss for that team. Azeez Ojulari steps in as the starter. But one thing that stands out watching that defense is that they do a really good job. If they think that you have a weak point along that offensive line, they do a good job by alignment with the way that they line up of getting the matchup that they want. So if they want to get Brian Burns on Fred Johnson, they'll do it. If they want to get Dexter Lawrence on Fred Johnson, they will find ways to be able to line up and get that one-on-one. They have a lot of different fronts that they mix in, and they'll do it by personnel grouping. We talk about the versatility of what the Eagles have had with Zach Bond. Oh, they line up in the 5-1, and then it's the 4-2. Well, they do the same thing with Brian Burns, where there are times where he's lined up as a natural linebacker, standing up 4 yards, 5 yards off the ball inside of a defensive end, and then he'll come down and he'll play his normal defensive end spot. He'll stand up over an interior lineman. So they're moving moving Burns around. All these guys up front are physical. They're all getting after the quarterback. It's going to be a tough front to go up against.
They are 9th in run DVOA on the season. And so obviously all eyes in this game on the ex-Giant, as somebody points out on the Super Chat. I believe it's Chase Daniel Plainview, our friend,
CDP,
who says the Giants let a player walk to the Eagles that could have contributed to their run game. How do you expect Jack Stoll to approach his revenge game?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they'll be picking his brain about the verbiage of the offense and some of the things that they're going to be wanting to try and do. As we know that the Eagles have done that in the past. Yeah, I mean, it's. To me, they will need to run the ball in this game because if they become one-dimensional, that's going to be a problem against this rush.
So let's talk Saquon. Yep. What are your expectations? Did you think that he looked any different last week as a part of the diminishing returns on the running game?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that 2-play sequence where he just before halftime was not good, right? But as a runner, I know there was a lot made of that one play where he
runs into Landon.
Dickerson got jacked up on that play.
Yeah.
The defensive tackle.
It did look live, and I said it to Zach at the time, he could have scored.
Yeah. So Landon was engaged with the defensive tackle. Yeah. The defensive tackle extended his arms and pushed Landon back like a good 3 feet right into the run lane where Saquon was running. So that wasn't like, oh, look at Saquon running into the back of his blockers. That was Landon Dickerson getting worked at the point of attack.
That's kind of like the coolest play that you can make as a defensive tackle, I feel like.
I think so.
It's like pushing a guy into his own teammate to make the tackle. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And honestly, Dexter Lawrence does that pretty routinely. So that's something I would expect to see in this game.
Okay, so in the passing game then, what are your expectations for how Kellen Moore will try to attack Shane Bowen? Yeah,
so Shane Bowen, coming from Tennessee, they were, for the most part, a very zone-heavy team. And I actually went back and I watched the last time Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts took on a Shane Bowen defense, and that was in the 2022 season. Tennessee comes to Lincoln Financial Field. The Eagles ended up blowing out that defense. And I thought they did a really good job in that game of getting Tennessee into predictable down and distance coverage looks. We heard Kellen Moore talk about that. You mentioned how the reason why we played a lot of 12 personnel was because they became more predictable. I think this is a game where you want to try and do that again. And I think if you're able to do that against this New York secondary, they could be had. They put a lot of faith in Deonte Banks, who was their first-round pick a year ago. He's very talented. Obviously, he tested, through the roof. He was an outstanding athlete from a combine standpoint coming out of Maryland last year, but not a guy that I think that it always shows up on film. He kind of reminds me a little bit. He's a little bit different build, Bo, but he kind of reminds me of DRC, where you're watching him kind of go through, and you're like, man, this guy is really gifted. Look how long he is. Look how explosive.
A little bit more muscly, right? But
yeah, a little bit
build
thicker.
Is different.
Yeah, the build is a little bit different. But I think at the end of the day, you're watching, you're like, he's just good enough to get you beat by that number one guy, right? He's just not that type of corner. And also, I mean, the quick game, you remember last year when the A.J. Brown went up against Forbes from Washington, it was just
ended his career.
Bullied him. Yeah. I think you can do that to Banks a little bit here in this game. And also, Cordell Flott, the other corner, the starting corner on the outside, he's missed a bunch of tackles.
One of my favorite names.
That's an outstanding
that's name. That's a Dr. Seuss name.
Cordell Flott.
Cordell Flott.
Yeah. He's fantastic. Like a doctor in Whoville. Cordell Flott. I am a big fan, though, of Drew Phillips, what he's done so far. I wasn't huge on him in Kentucky, but he's looked pretty good playing in the slot for them. So I think when you look at their outside corners, I do think the Eagles have their matchups there that they can try and win. And so if you can protect, you have those options there. If you can get into predictable coverage looks there, I think that the Eagles have shown the ability in the past to dial up some pass plays to attack those coverage schemes downfield.
So in this particular matchup, you think we might see them continue to lean into 12? You would rather keep the Giants in base potentially, or would you rather see them in nickel?
This is where the downside of us on the outside not having all of the data attached to the film at your fingertips, where it's let me look at every single time when the opponent lines up in 12 and on first and 10. Past midfield, what's the coverage look like? What do they like to do in the red zone against certain personnel groupings? The coaching staffs around the NFL and around college have all of that at the click of a button, and so that it get a little bit easier to try and figure out what it is that makes it predictable. So I can't say exactly what do they need to do to try and push those buttons, but whatever it is, they know, and so you want to try and get into those situations as best you can.
Now, no Dallas Goedert, presumably, in this game.
Seems that way.
It's not official yet, but that's our expectation. So. Are you comfortable if Grant Calcaterra is option number 3 in the passing game? And are we ever going to see if this is the Saquon revenge game? Is this the game to try to bring him back into the passing game?
Yeah, I think you could definitely do that here in this game. I think when you look at their linebackers, if that's the matchup you're trying to get, those guys can be had. Bobby Okereke has done a nice job. I do like Okereke. It kind of reminds me of TJ Edwards. He's that kind of player, really heady. He's a great tackler, run game, pass game. He's not like an outstanding athlete, but just good enough there. Micah McFadden is the other starter next to him. He's a guy, I want to get Saquon on him as often as possible. It's a linebacker wearing number 41, big white guy in space.
Yeah,
love that all day. So I think that's one that you want to try and circle and see if you can get that matchup. And honestly, that might be the thing is, hey, you know what? We're going to go into 12 personnel to try and keep them in base, keep that extra linebacker on the field and see if we can get that matchup. And because I like Calcaterra against McFadden.
Okay.
I might like Stoll against McFadden in space. So
revenge game.
Hey, whatever buttons you got to push, you try and push them here.
So it's not going to be the Jahan Dotson breakout game.
I don't think so. They do play a decent amount of sub package. They'll lean into the dime, and that's when they get Isaiah Simmons on the field and have him roam in the middle, and they just kind of say like, hey, just go be an athlete out there. But I think at the end of the day, like this is one where you do want to lean on those stars in the middle certainly, or on the outside.
Last thing from a game plan perspective, this Giants defense, part of what makes the fronts interesting is that they change those fronts up a lot.
Yes.
Is that a thing that we can pay attention to on Sunday?
Yeah, I think especially on third down, they like to do the double A gap looks, the little sugar in the A gap. So you can expect to see that. I mentioned they like to get into dime, so they get Isaiah Simmons on the field. They can bring him into those pressure looks, and so
try to get into dime. It's such a small coin.
It's
the smallest we've got.
It's a tight hole to be able to squeeze in there. But I think when you look at the way that they want to play, they certainly will try and get into those pressure looks. And again, that they use that to try and find your weakness along the offensive line. So if they think, hey, you know what, we want to get Dexter Lawrence on Mekhi Becton, or if they think, hey, we like what we've seen from Dickerson on tape, let's get Lawrence on Dickerson, whatever that is, they will find ways to be able to get there.
Okay. You feel good about the matchup from the Eagles' perspective?
I think they need to run the ball. They need to be able to run the ball in this game. I think if they become one-dimensional like they were last week, because they were very conservative with the way that they played the Browns. Like from a play calling standpoint, it was a lot of run game, and then it was quick vertical throws down the field, like ball out of Jalen Hurts' hands fast. My guess is they'll try and replicate that. The other thing to remember too, Jim Schwartz and Shane Bowen. Jim Schwartz, before he went to Cleveland, spent 2 years in Tennessee with Shane Bowen. He was like the senior defensive assistant. I'm sure that Bowen is watching and he's like, all right, like these are things that they did. We could try and pull that. I'm sure he had conversation with Schwartz at some point this week as well. If not already, I'm sure in the next couple of days. So that's something to watch here in this game. I would think that they'll try and find ways to be able to get after Hurts in that way.
What did you make of Lane Johnson's comments in the locker room yesterday about one of the things that they'd like to work on offensively is snapping the ball sooner?
Honestly, with the amount of time I spent on that Jalen Hurts piece on Monday and Tuesday, I had no bandwidth to be able to think about that anymore. So I did see it, and I did think about it. I would like to go and look at, because we know, like, all right, I know I'm pretty sure Daniz had put out on Twitter, like, who were the quarterbacks and who are the offenses that snapped the ball latest in the pre-snap phase and all of that. And so the Eagles were second behind Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. And the Jets, with Rodgers, they don't use any motion either. Mm-hmm. And so it's very difficult if you are going to, and I'm just not even talking about like the confusion aspect of like, oh, the play comes in late and then guys are rushing the line. Like, there's that part of it, which you don't want. But then also, if you are not going to be a motion team, you're going to be static, and you're going to wait to, like, you're giving the defense plenty of time to be able to look at what you're doing. That makes it tough, and that's why the Jets have had issues in the past as well.
We all silly like the mayor.